What if the ancient idea of a disembodied entity can be understood not as proof that certain people are literally possessed, but as an esoteric metaphor for what happens when a human being becomes profoundly disconnected from their conscience, embodiment, and authentic self? This is where psychology and esoteric symbolism intersect. Across many spiritual traditions, people have described destructive forces as shadows, parasites, wandering spirits, shells, or disembodied entities. But an important distinction must be made. There is no reliable scientific evidence that narcissistic personality traits mean a person literally houses a disembodied entity. So let's explore the concept without confusing spiritual symbolism with established fact. The empty shell archetype. In esoteric language, the image of an empty vessel represents a person who has become disconnected from their deeper essence. Psychologically, something resembling this metaphor can occur when a person's behavior becomes dominated by compulsive self-protection, shame avoidance, external validation, emotional dysregulation, entitlement, manipulation, chronic projection, lack of accountability. The person can begin functioning through a rigid psychological defense system rather than through reflective awareness. The spiritual traditions might call this possession by the shadow. Psychology might describe it as maladaptive patterns becoming deeply entrenched. Different language, similar metaphorical territory. The shadow. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow provides one of the strongest bridges between psychology and esotericism. The shadow represents aspects of ourselves that consciousness refuses to acknowledge. The problem begins when those rejected qualities are projected outward. Instead of, I feel inadequate, the unconscious mind may construct, you're the inadequate one. Instead of, I'm envious, the projection becomes, you're arrogant. Instead of, I feel powerless, the behavior becomes an attempt to control someone else. This is why projection is such a powerful psycho-spiritual symbol. What isn't integrated internally gets experienced externally. Why the entity metaphor feels so powerful. Imagine watching someone repeatedly behave in ways that appear completely disconnected from empathy, reflection, or accountability. Their personality seems to change depending on who is watching. Their narrative changes when challenged. They deny what they previously said. They seek admiration while attacking perceived threats. They externalize blame. They appear emotionally activated by another person's independence. To an observer, this can feel like, who is this person? Ancient cultures sometimes interpreted this kind of extreme behavior through supernatural frameworks. Modern psychology tends to investigate underlying mechanisms such as trauma, personality organization, attachment patterns, cognition, emotional regulation, and social learning. The esoteric interpretation can still be useful, but primarily as symbolic language. The disincarnate state. Here's the deeper metaphor. A disembodied entity has no grounded physical center. Psychologically, the metaphor can represent a person who is disconnected from their own internal center and therefore constantly seeks regulation externally. They need another person's attention, another person's admiration, another person's submission, another person's emotional reaction, another person's validation, and when that supply disappears, internal instability can intensify. The person begins looking outward for something to regulate what they cannot regulate inwardly. That is where control can emerge. The esoteric warning. This is why many mystical traditions emphasize embodiment. Ground yourself, know yourself, observe your emotions, take responsibility for your actions, cultivate discernment, return attention to the body, develop an internal center, because the opposite of psychological fragmentation is integration. The goal isn't to label another person as an entity. The goal is to become so internally integrated that you don't become psychologically entangled with destructive patterns around you. And this is where the chosen one archetype enters. The chosen one symbolically represents the individual who refuses to surrender their center. They don't need to diagnose the antagonist. They don't need to determine whether something supernatural is happening. They observe behavior. They establish boundaries. They regulate themselves. They protect their attention. They remain connected to their values. And they refuse to allow another person's shadow to become their identity. That's spiritual sovereignty. Because the most dangerous form of spiritual confusion isn't necessarily believing in entities. It's losing your own center while trying to understand someone else's darkness. The alchemical lesson. The shadow you encounter becomes an invitation to strengthen your own consciousness. Projection teaches discernment. Manipulation teaches boundaries. Chaos teaches grounding. Envy teaches you not to abandon your purpose. Conflict teaches emotional regulation. And fear teaches you where your attention has become vulnerable. The objective isn't destroy the entity. It's integrate myself so completely that another person's unresolved shadow cannot become my reality. That is the deeper alchemy. You don't have to absorb their darkness. You don't have to fight their darkness. You don't even have to understand all of it. You simply refuse to become it. Final message. Whether you interpret the phenomenon psychologically, spiritually, or symbolically, the principle remains powerful. Don't give your consciousness away trying to decode someone else's. Stay embodied, stay discerning, stay grounded in observable reality, protect your boundaries, and keep your attention anchored to your purpose. Because your greatest spiritual protection isn't fear of what might be inhabiting someone else. And that's Alchemy.In.Motion. It's knowing what inhabits you, your values, your consciousness, your agency, and your choice to remain fully present in your own life. The disembodied entity can be explored as an ancient spiritual metaphor for fragmentation, projection, and disconnection from one's authentic center. Don't confuse metaphor with proof. The real power is learning to recognize destructive patterns without allowing them to colonize your consciousness. If this resonates with your psycho-spiritual journey, comment, "I stay embodied." Then share this with someone learning the difference between understanding darkness and becoming consumed by it. Be sure to like, share, and follow your tribe of alchemists.